And then I threw a hissy fit about the progress of digital and in traditional media, left and worked for a bunch of startups, some of which are around, some of which are not. The two most recent ones are Reportedly, which was a first look media project that strived to tell human rights and social justice stories through social media. That was helmed by Andy Carvin, who is brilliant and best known as the guy who live tweeted the Arab Spring for NPR. He was my work husband for years. And then he and I, when Reportedly lost the funding, we left and went to Now This. So I spent the past year at Now This. I am not a video person. I'll just put that out there. I cannot edit video for the life of me. I tried. It takes me about like an hour or like a day to do something that's 90 seconds, which is not the norm. But I did learn how to produce. And the reason I ended up there is we wanted to see if the model that we built for Reportedly would work on a more visual format. We had done a bunch of video storytelling at Reportedly, and we wanted to kind of expand that a little bit. Plus, Now This at the time wanted to do a lot more breaking news and figure out how, they're a very fast organization as it is, but they wanted to figure out how to be even faster and more accurate at the same time. So Now This is based in New York, and there's about 100 staffers, most of which are producers who are probably fresh out of college or their first or second job. They produce 90-second videos, but they started doing long-form videos recently. So at Reportedly, we created, I guess, a form of storytelling that is now very popular called threading. So these are tweets from the Paris attacks. I'm not a competitive person, but my crowning achievement with this is we beat AFP, AP, and Reuters on social media in reporting the Paris attacks. And we were a team of 6 based around the world. And so we beat very large, we also beat CNN. That's always a nice thing. And we did that because we had a good relationship with our audience, and they tipped us off to something that was happening that even Paris media had barely begun to report, and we started looking into it. And these are 2 snippets of the very long thread that we ended up doing. I think I made a map of all of the alleged attacks. We debunked along the way, and everything would be found in this one thread. This is like super popular now for tweet storms, but we used it to collect stories instead of just using hashtags, because we would often be tweeting about a very big hashtaggy thing like Paris attacks or Pulse shootings, stuff like that. So I'm here to talk to you about story forms, and I thought I would give you some ideas of what's out there already in terms of story forms, and then I'll give you a kind of a playbook on how to do this. I've worked in big and small organizations, so I try to recognize that I can give you like some really great like Washington Post ideas, and then you'll be like, well, we're a newsroom of 5, so we can't do that, nor do we have the money or contacts with so-and-so platform. So I'm going to try to break it down to a way that anybody can do this, even if they're a freelancer. So here are my favorite things that are out there. And I like framing everything as a what if question. If you get into creation of stuff, design thinking is sort of my jam. Design thinking looks at things as a kind of a question of like, what if we did X, Y, Z? And then you sketch out what happens and you kind of tackle problems that way. So this is the BBC, and they have a really good post on several story forms that they have tried to pilot in the past year. And one of the questions they asked is, what if users could choose what form they wanted the story to be in next? So if you can see, this is about Catalonia, which has been through a pretty big crisis this year, and you've got like kind of the basics, and then you get to say, next, how did Catalonia get here? And you can say, I don't care about that, skip it. I want a short text, I want long text, I want a quick video. And then you can keep going from there. This person chose short text, and then they chose video for the next question. They also piloted something that gave you context. So you could be reading a story, and there would be, kind of a big word or like something about history or a political action, and then you could click on it and you would learn a little bit more about that, sort of like the Wikipedia, like the way you can on Wikipedia and go down the rabbit hole. I think those are pretty brilliant and pretty easy to do, honestly, because you have all of that information. They tend to publish all of their stuff that is public, and some of the code is public, some of it. What if you could choose your own adventure? One of my favorite kinds of books when I was a kid. Do you guys remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books? I'm like, okay, that's good. I was like, am I old? I love Choose Your Own Adventure books. I love, now as a kid that like read through it, and then I would go back and be like, no, I don't want to die. I'm really going to go back and like try going down the right path in the cave, or try fighting the monster and see what happens. That sort of like exploration is so great. And they did it in like just like these little books. And now we have all of these devices where you can do that. So one of my favorite games on my phone is a game called Lifeline. And it's a text-based game. You're basically texting with somebody that is like locked or lost in the future or something like that. And it's very similar to very, very, very early video games, where you would say, you're down in the dungeon. Do you fight the dragon or do you run away? Yes or no. And so Lifeline is just like that. It's just a choose your own adventure, but it's on your phone. People pay for it. It's a pretty popular game. So what if you could do that with Alexa? So I have not seen a news brand do this, and I keep challenging news brands to do this, and no one's done it. One of the best that I saw, and Alexa's done several of these, Amazon has done several of these, almost all fiction. They did like a Easter one where you went in, it was sort of like Alice in Wonderland, where you went into the garden and then you met like a magical rabbit. This one, which was really cool, which was based on Westworld, and they did it in conjunction with HBO. So you got to explore Westworld through many of the characters that you know through the show. And it's not hard. So John Keefe showed you how to do those bots on Facebook. So to me, that's the same thing as this. This is just, you tell Alexa to talk back to you instead of it types back to you in Facebook Messenger. That's sort of my belief. Like everything is probably transmutable in another place. You just have to sit down and think about it. What if we changed how we staff breaking news? So this is an experiment we did at Now This. We went and covered a police protest, and instead of the way they usually cover police protests and breaking news, which is to send some people to do some Facebook Lives on the ground, which is great and popular, and we did do, we said, what if we left somebody at home, Andy in this case, and we asked them to sort of serve as mission control. So I wish I had some of the WhatsApp messages. We had a WhatsApp group, and I would be on camera running around, which I'm not an on-camera person. I would be on camera running around, and then I could see in my phone the notification for WhatsApp, and Andy's like, talk louder, no one can hear you. Can you go back over there? So he pretty much was directing me as I was going along. It really helps because he was watching all of the live streams and everything on Twitter, and then curating stuff that we were tweeting and stuff that we were saying. And he had this bird's eye view of, there was a point where there was a police kettle going on, and police kettling is when the police kind of box protesters in. Technically they're not supposed to do that. They box protesters in, and then they arrest everybody in the area. There's a lawsuit going on about that. They're not supposed to do that because, what if you were just walking your dog and you happened to be there and you got arrested? I think that happened to a guy. but we were going toward it because that's where all the press was going. And he was like, no, turn around, go back. He's like, something bad is happening there and you don't want to go that way. And we narrowly avoided getting arrested with like everybody else, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and several live streamers. And so we were safe, which most press wasn't in that case. So we took all of this stuff that we did. We did a bunch of Facebook Lives. We did all of these tweets and all of that. And then we said, well, what if we took the stuff we produced from breaking news and didn't just leave it there, but made it into something bigger? Does this play? Is this going to play? No. Hold on. I'm going to play you like 2 seconds of this. Oh, of course, there's an ad.
Is anybody watching that?
Yeah, I'm watching that. The Eagles and the Giants are playing on.
What's wrong with the state of Missouri? Somebody, please, come and see about Missouri because it's too far. It's too much.
3 years before Ferguson erupted over the death of Michael Brown, there was another fatal police shooting in Missouri that got limited attention: the death of Anthony Lamar Smith. Now, 6 years later, the city of St. Louis is at another monumental moment. People in St. Louis are tired of the discrimination, the deep-rooted racism, and police overreach. But most of all, they're frustrated little has changed since Ferguson. Okay, I'm just going to play you that part. The footage that you see there was partially shot on a high-end, it was like a 5D or 4D, a big, nice photographer's camera, and then part of it was shot on my phone. And you really can't tell because we had a very lovely editor who could kind of seamlessly blend those things. But we used all of our footage plus a little bit. We didn't have to use anybody else's footage like Reuters or CNN or anybody, which was really great. And we got to use everything that we had learned about breaking news to tell us a much more contextual story about where St. Louis was after Ferguson and why they're still protesting and what the tension is like in the city. We did 5 videos. We did a video like this. We did a video about what the clergy are like in St. Louis and how they play such a big role. We did a story about the Delmar Divide, which is a street that runs through St. Louis, which essentially segregates the city. And then we did a piece about the case. This is more about the case itself. We did a piece about what happens after the case. And then we did a more media analysis piece based off of other media and how they were saying that the protesters got violent. In our estimation, they did not. It was partially the police pushed them to a point where they got more violent, and so a lot of windows were broken and people were hurt, but it was only because of things like kettling. So we analyzed other media and talked about why they got it wrong. Okay. Wow. What if audio slideshows worked better on mobile? So I used to teach, and one of the things we would make our poor students do is learn how to do audio slideshows. And inevitably, every year, they would be like, no one uses these anymore. Like, why do I need to learn to do this? Who cares about an audio slideshow? And I would always tell them, I was like, it's about putting the pieces together. It's not about the audio slideshow. It's about, we're trying to teach you how to like piece together a story using different media. So this is from the New York Times. Let me see if I can get this to play. And it is, this is my phone, and it is you just swipe, and you get like these little kind of captions, I suppose, and it walks you through this the city. They've done this a couple times with a bunch of different things, and I think it's an audio slideshow, but basically, there's a little bit of noise in the background, and you can hear a bunch of places have done similar things to this, where you can send a reporter out to say, like, take 12 photos, and then have the reporter kind of narrate along the way through text. So that's an old thing, kind of made new, and it's really great on mobile. It's a little less exciting on desktop, but it's really nice to do on mobile. No. Okay. This is a point where usually people are like, well, I don't have, these are all big brands and you have money and time and I'm an individual person. I work in a very old school newsroom where we can barely get people to tweet. This is not going to happen. I believe that thinking about experimentation is not just, and new story forms is not just thinking about technology. I'm very much in line with Yusuf in that, like, this is about how we interact with our audiences, how we tell stories with them and to them, and kind of breaking the way that you have been taught. Like, inverted pyramid doesn't really exist anymore. You know, the inverted pyramid was sort of created when we were doing all text stuff and you needed the important stuff at the top because, you know, you would probably run out of space in the paper later. The web has infinite space. We have many more possibilities now than we used to. So I think it's less about technology, and I could tell you all about like the technology you could use and stuff, but I think it's much more granular than that. So here's my proposition. Take a story and think of every piece of it as a Lego block. So I'm not even going to call it story. I'm going to call it information. Information you gather while learning about a thing. It could be water rates. It could be police shooting. It could be a riot. It could be a sports game. It could be anything. And there's different parts of that story. And right now what we do is we take that story and we just move it to different places. So you'll take the story that's in the paper, you'll move it and put it on the website. And then you'll do a slightly Instagramier video of that and then move it to Instagram. And you'll probably publish a different version, a slightly different version of that video on Facebook. So we're just shuffling things, pretty much the same thing around. But the fun of Legos is that you can take everything apart and then put it back together and create something wholly new. Like all these, there's only so many kinds of Lego blocks, and they're very specific about that. And but you can create all sorts of stuff. If you've ever been to Legoland, like you can definitely create like anything with Legos. So another way of looking at this is story charts. So novelists use this as a way to sort of map out what their characters are doing. So there's a bunch of different versions here. So the one in the middle is sort of the classic novelist arc. So there's exposition, you learn about an incident, there's a climax, and then there's a denouement, which is basically the book goes up. It's really exciting, and then it's kind of like a nice, happy, well, not always happy, but the kind of wrapping up ending. There's also stories that branch out, and there's stories, this is the drawing of like a soap opera. So all those lines are different characters, and they go up and down, and there's things that are going on, but they go on forever, and they're continuous. This is really good from a really good Pinterest board that the journalism professor created, full of story charts. It's all it is story charts. So I want to show you some more. This is by Robert Smith of Planet Money, who is an amazing reporter and one of the best people I've ever had the pleasure of like working with on a story. So he did these 4 kind of story charts. And he talks about it in audio, in the terms of audio, but it really works for anything. So there's like the number 4 is you can give an audience signposts along the way and kind of like show them where they are. And you can do a kind of a flat line story where it's like, here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing. Or you can build in like tiny arcs throughout the story. If you think of your story less as like, whenever I write stories, I think of here's a lead, here's a quote, here's some stuff, here's a quote, here's some stuff, and then here's my ending quote. I have a bad habit of ending stories on quotes. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more art to it than that. And if you believe in art and storytelling, then breaking story forms gets a little bit easier. So this is a way I plan out my stories. It involves a lot of sticky notes, like a lot of sticky notes. And when I did this when I came back from St. Louis, I've done this for pretty much every big story I've ever worked on. And this, you see the white things? So white things are like literally my draft that I have cut into pieces. Because I didn't like the flow of my story. I was like, this is not like interesting. It's just a big block of text. I can't do it. The sticky notes are different pieces of like visual. I worked with this is for a story about minimum wage in Oakland, and those are different visual pieces because I worked with a photographer friend on that. And I wanted to make sure the visuals made sense with where I was in the text and that I could get this really great arc of several stories going on at once. So think about everything you have as a sticky note. So you have quotes, you have facts, you have documents, you have visuals, you have, the more info box, like the who, what, where, why, when, of like, here's when this concert is or when this event is, and you have context, which is like you analyzing and explaining things. Think of all of those as separate sticky notes. You can move everything around. It doesn't matter what platform you are or where you are. You can move them around and kind of like make them work for the platform. This works. I think this works pretty well for me because it helps me get out of my head and get out of like the idea of like just writing straight through something and like getting it out of the way. So this is my approach to experiments. There are people who think about things this way, and then there are people who don't. I tend to gravitate to people that want to break things or want to look at things in a new and different way. I tend to hang out with them. I was a reporter. I think editors hated me. I was a reporter. I always had like some story that I wasn't supposed to be reporting, or that I hadn't gotten approved. That was like my project story, and I was like, I'm going to make this water story interesting. People are going to care about these millions of gallons of water, or whatever it is. That's a compelling force that actually led us to create Reportedly, because we cared about these stories that no one else gave a damn about. We cared about the refugee crisis very, very early when only European media was reporting on it. We cared about Yemen from day one. I was woken up by a tweet and probably didn't sleep for months after that. The first night that Saudi Arabia started bombing Yemen, and we did daily like kind of updates of like where the bombing was, what the humanitarian crisis was, and it took months before like major media cared about that. I love stories that are not the norm. I love telling complex stories. I keep telling people like I love water stories because they're very boring, but they're also really interesting and they matter so much. When I was a city council reporter, I had to put out like 4 stories a week, which is a lot for a newspaper reporter at the time. It's now like kind of easy actually. But I would go to a city council meeting and I did like bullet points for everything that was decided at the city council meeting instead of writing like 4 full stories. So to do that, it gave me time to work on the stuff I wanted to, which Janice was talking about. Like I made the non-fun reporting and the non-fun stuff as quick and easy and as digestible for other people as possible, so I could spend more time on my weird water story. And so it allows for that. You can also, I'm a big fan of looking at things outside of journalism and saying, how could we use this? So, like the Alexa thing with the choose your own story, no media has done that. I haven't seen any media. It's totally doable because we're all building bots and stuff, so it's not that hard. I also think like I would love to have a podcast told where I interact with it through the podcast, and then it has an alternate ending that I can select. That's not hard. That's editing a podcast and editing it in chunks and then mapping it out. It's the same thing that you would give people. It's just kind of mishmashed up. One of the things I did was it was an anniversary of the LA riots, one of the LA riots, I can't remember which one. And there was this new and existing platform for sort of like PowerPoints plus, sort of like Prezi, where you can like kind of follow a story. And it allowed for like photo, video, audio, kind of all mishmash. This was years ago. And it was meant for presentations like this. It was meant for like, presenting your new product. I was like, well, what if we took ideas and thoughts from people that lived through the riots and what they thought of LA then and what they think of LA now. And made those put little quote boxes. And then we could also use those on social. We could just publish an individual slide on Facebook or Twitter. But, if they wanted the full kind of feeling, they could do that. So I made that. I had music that was created around the time of the riots. In the background, I had a little bit of audio. I had people's quotes that they had given me and photos that I dug up in the library. It did really well. It was a tool that was not meant for journalism. That's the fun of working with story forums, of finding something that also they're usually, if you're the first journalist, be like, hey, can I use your tool to do this random thing? They're usually pretty excited. It's a new market that they probably haven't explored or thought about. I would frequently talk to founders of things and be like, I want to use your thing for journalism. Will you give me a free account? Usually got the free account. So look outside the news industry for what you want to do. Play with the things that are coming out. I'm a huge fan of Product Hunt, which is a community on the internet that is pretty much all new technologies, new apps, new websites. I knew we had done something right with Reportedly when somebody actually product hunted us. They put us on Product Hunt because they're like, this is a really different way of telling journalism. And people upvoted us, which was very nice because we were trying to break things. So it's everything from email clients to different presentation techniques to new things you can use to edit video and stuff like that. So once you think about these blocks, you're like, what do I do with them? I challenge folks to think of platform. I call it platform intelligence. Know what you're putting where and why. That seems very simple. But you're not going to put a complex tax story on Instagram stories because no one is going to get through that. When I was working for the KPCC, the radio station in LA, you had this rule, all the reporters had this rule that you can't put a statistics heavy audio report out. People don't listen to it. You can't say 4 numbers in a row when you're doing audio because people just zone it out and they don't remember the number and it doesn't matter. So they would find different ways of telling that. So know what you're putting where. Pick the facets of the story that work best for whatever platform you're looking at. And don't feel like you have to put the same story in every place. I reportedly retold some stories regularly told breaking news stories on Twitter, but not on Facebook because Facebook's not meant for that. The algorithm does not like it. So think about platform intelligence. And then learn forward. So in the news industry, the most frustrating, one of the things that made me throw up my hands and say, I'm going to go work for startups is we fail. We fail a lot, which is fine. But then we're just no, I don't even want to talk about that ever again. We're just going to try something different. And there's a lot of whiplash. There's a lot of whiplash from trying new things all the time. Or some editor read about something on Digiday and they're like, please, can we try this new thing? And you're like, oh. I was once asked to how do we buy followers from some old white guy? And I was like, we don't do that. But I explained to him this is why, and we other places have learned that doing this is bad, and so learn forward. Every time you fail, every kind of story form you try and people don't like it, try to figure out why and then move forward. So when we were redoing breaking news at Now This, every single breaking news story we would go through, we would reevaluate the strategy and the workflow after every single story. We would have a big meeting where we would say what worked, what didn't work, and what should we try next time. And we made that process better step by step. If we had given up at the first, we could have given up at the first step because it didn't work very well the first time. But we just learned forward. We applied everything forward. And it's great with stories because it's one story. And in the age of the web, one story people will forget. If you tried something and it just tanked, it was just terrible, it didn't work, I'm not going to remember it. You're probably not going to remember it. It's one blip in the tweet stream or whatever it is. News moves too fast these days. So use your whole notebook. All of it, like all of the notes. Take notes on Twitter. Visuals can go, even the shitty visuals can go somewhere. There's somewhere you can put that. Explain your fact checks. I think it's funny that we debunk things all the time in newsrooms, but we don't tell the audience about it. And then they were like, well, why is this fake news doing so well? You didn't tell anybody it's fake news. You didn't contextualize. You didn't explain. You did the work, but you didn't use it. It's in your brain. Everything in your brain is a useful thing to some person in your audience. And this is a quote from Ben Horowitz from a book called The Hard Thing About the Hard Things, which is one of my favorite books I read in the past year. And it's about like really terrible things in business, like how to fire your best friend or something like that. And I find it really poignant to think about, like, you have to keep looking. We have to keep looking for ways to tell stories differently and how to reach people differently. So, you have to try, we have to try IGTV. No one's using it. It's probably going to fail, but we should try it and then figure out what works and then try to apply that toward whatever the next thing is, because there's going to be a next thing. Twitter's not the end of it. Facebook's not the end of it. There's always going to be a next thing. So we should learn from where we are and take notes and think about it and then move forward. And so it's, you need to sit there and pay attention and experiment. And I think I made it like right on time. Yes.
What do you talked about a variety of story forms or ideas or possibilities. I love the Lego example because I think your whole talk sort of fits into all these pieces you talked about are different pieces, different Legos. What story forms do you like? What do you like to use?
I have a very short attention span, and I'm addicted to my phone. I actually gave my husband my phone in a box for his birthday one year, and I said, here, you can have this for a weekend. And he was so happy. He was like, this is the best gift you could give me. You not looking at your phone for a weekend. So I'm really interested in like mobile stuff and how we can, I have this like idea. I'm a fountain of ideas. I have this idea of like when I'm standing in line in Target and waiting, like how do I squeeze a story into that part of somebody's day? Right now all we do is like we have these apps that are basically just a homepage, and they're lovely and wonderful, but most people aren't going to download like their really, really local papers app because it's probably terrible. It's probably not well developed. But is there a way we can, tell a story really quickly where people will understand? Is there a way, the way I think of the Daily from the New York Times is they were like, well, how do we do a podcast without doing a lot of work? And it's not a lot of work. If you think about the Daily, it is really, they just like grab a reporter and they say, hey, come in here, just come talk about your story for 20 minutes. And that's all it is. If they don't report on anything that's outside of the New York Times, they do this like really quick rundown of like what's going on in the world, and they just interview one of their own reporters. And it's this like massive success. But it's just the reporter retelling the story in an audio form that you can listen to in your car. And that's the sort of stuff that excites me, like trying to figure out ways where if I'm going somewhere or if I'm doing something, to squeeze in a story, squeeze in knowledge.
Yeah, hi. You mentioned that you believe that the inverted style of writing is gone away. And I'm just curious, what would you say, or what advice would you have to reporters that are working on those mundane stories, covering city council meetings, or having to write that tax story that maybe the public needs to be aware of, but they're not necessarily a real sexy topic?
Yeah, there's like peas and carrots journalism, right? And then like apple pie journalism. I think it's a huge challenge to figure out how to make peas and carrots journalism fascinating. That's why I love water stories. Like no one cares about water until they don't have any or they have too much. Like just it doesn't matter to them. But if you can explain it in a way that's relevant to them, and that's why I actually ended up going down the path of audience engagement, because I realized I was writing these stories that no one was reading because they were just like boring. They were boring to me, and I was writing them. So like, why would anybody read them? So I tried to find ways that was interesting. Like, take a tax story. Like the taxes affect everybody, but people only really care about taxes in terms of like, how much more do I need to pay? So is there a way for you to like show people, is there like, how is this tax change going to change my life? And if that's like, you know, breaking it down, walking it through, is that like making it interactive, where you can like put in your income and it'll tell you how your taxes will change? Is it like following very different kind of people and, you know, having two stories about how taxes affect these two different groups? Like, break it down to like what means something to people, and then also just like talk to your audience about it. We don't really talk to people as much as we used to. Like, as a reporter, I was supposed to be wandering around the community. And now we just like hang out in like our desks, which is fine. And I've done social media reporting. Like, if you're gonna hang out at your desk, like hang out in social media and like talk to like find the communities within your community and talk to those people. You know, and if that means talking to somebody that might be misinformed, then that's an opportunity to me of like, okay, so people believe that this is true, so maybe we should run a story about why it's not true. Service journalism, right? If you can frame everything as service journalism, it makes a lot more sense.
Great presentation, Kim. You were mentioning about how we need to get outside the area of journalism to experiment and innovate. What are some of the fields or industries that you think journalists and news organizations could look to, and perhaps for your own personal opinion, which ones you tend to gravitate towards?
I look at there are many professions that tell stories, essentially. Like design, web design, all of that in general, like designers, I think have the same challenge we do of like vying for people's attention. So even things like product design are really interesting to me because it's about like where like people like sans serif fonts now. Right, like it's just like everything is a sans serif font if you look at stuff, and how does that, like, how can I apply that toward my story? Like, can I make it a little more like reader friendly on the eye or look cooler by using a sans serif font instead of a serif font? Little things like that. I also look a lot at activism and human rights workers. So I did a contract with the Human Rights Center at Berkeley, and I was teaching human rights lawyers, like people who worked at, like Interpol and the ICC and stuff like that, how to verify and fact check things that they saw, because they're using the same stuff that I was using to tell stories to try and prosecute these people. I actually worked with these human rights lawyers on a story, I can't tell you which one, that I had reported on. And they were like, well, how do I know these truths are true? I'm like, well, here's how you do this. Here's how you look at this video in Yemen and break it down and say whether it's true or not. And so it's the same techniques. So like, I'm really interested in what like Amnesty Watch is doing to call, truth to power around the world, or Human Rights Watch. They actually do a lot more storytelling than we think they do. Also, like artists in general, because I think journalism is an art in a way.
Okay, I'll ask the last question, and that is back to the Lego blocks idea. There's probably a right way and a wrong way to put those blocks together. There's probably a biased way and an unbiased way to put those blocks together. Is there any guidance do you have any guidance on that?
I don't think there's a wrong way. Like, you can make like a bigger square Lego block, and like if that's cool to somebody. I I think if you want to look at it like in terms of bias or not bias, like look at all these ideas sections that are coming out, right? So the Atlantic is coming out with ideas section. The San Diego Union Tribune has a really good opinions/ideas section. Like there's if you want to put the blocks together that way of like, here's one side, here's another side, let's present them separately, like that can go somewhere. There's a place for something. Like the great thing about the web is it's like infinitely buildable. You can build a whole vertical for a thing and decide it doesn't work and then, just not link to it anymore. People will lose it. So I don't think there's a wrong way to build something. I'd rather people try to build new things, period, and figure out what works and what doesn't, or what our audiences respond to and what they don't, and then not build. Like the fear of failure sets us back. People like to think that I have had a very risky career, or like, I've done a lot of really random things, but I usually tell them none of this was by choice. I just ended up, I just said, this is interesting. And then like went down this path. Like, how did I end up in this? I'm like, yeah, video is kind of interesting. People seem to really like that kind of stuff. Let's do that for a year. Your career is very long and no one cares if you change tracks a lot. So it's fine. And no one remembers your failures unless it's really big, but that's very rare.
Hey, let's thank Kim. Okay, we're going to take